All right, welcome back everybody to the brain injury discussion. This is Jay, and today we're going to be talking about more anatomy. So much anatomy that goes into the brain, and I think we could make 20 episodes on anatomy and still have things to cover. Today we're going to talk about the limbic system, which is one of the components that is inside of the brain, above the brainstem. And I think there's a lot here we can cover. And I think a lot of this does not get a lot of coverage because it's kind of overlooked. Um, put in the chat if you have heard of the limbic system before seeing this video. But I digress. I think we should look at it and let's give it a fair shake. So let's learn together. By the way, sources will be in the description below. We'd appreciate a thumbs up and a subscription. But anyways, let's get started. So the limbic system contains these structures that are in fact highlighted here. So the cingulate gyrus, the basal ganglia, the thalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus. So these are all the structures here that are a part of the limbic system. And so this regulates emotion, behavior, memory, smell, as well as other senses as well. So, um, with that being said, that's a lot to cover with about six individual structures that contain the system. Each one of these structures does have its own anatomy and its own set of structures within, but this is meant to be just a quick overview of what the limbic system does. And so, because we know what the cerebrum does, what the cerebellum and the spinal column does, by the way, that those are good episodes, would highly recommend it. Um, it's important to know the structures inside the brain, especially if you're going to be working with people with brain injury. So that being said, let's continue on and let's find out what do these structures do and what's their importance to not only the brain but also our daily lives and what could this affect. And so let's start with the hypothalamus. So hypo, again, that's a word meaning low. The hypothalamus is here, and it is below the thalamus. It is also below the other systems. But again, as you can see, there's plenty of information here we can cover. But the hypothalamus is very important to your daily life because it maintains something called homeostasis. Homeostasis is the process of body temperature regulation. So if your body temperature is somewhere at a happy 97 to 98 to 99, your hypothalamus must be working. So again, the hypothalamus plays a role in regulating body temperature. Again, it is located centrally into the brain. It connects part of the cerebral cortex to the brain stem, and it controls some endocrine functions. Now, you might be thinking, well, Jay, what are endocrine functions? Think hormones, think thyroid. Those endocrine functions do regulate body temperature, so homeostasis. And so, if something is wrong with the hypothalamus, it could show up as maybe an inability to regulate body temperature, or it could uh, maybe wild one way, wild another. Again, the hypothalamus is complex within itself, but you might want to take away that, yeah, that's the thing that regulates body temperature. That being said, we got more structure, so let's move on. The basal ganglia. Again, it is this structure right here. It's above the hypothalamus. It connects to the amygdala and the thalamus. It also this plays an interesting role because a reward center. So if you get like a flood of serotonin or um, dopamine, that is partly controlled by your basal ganglia. So when you feel happy about doing something good, that is your basal ganglia at work. It does involve some motor control, not much, but some, and it is part of that conscious and voluntary movement. So if I were to grab a cup of coffee, like I did this morning, I used my basal ganglia. But if my brain is telling um, my hand, hey, grab this cup of coffee, and it doesn't, there might be a problem with the basal ganglia. So again, an important structure that is located deep within the brain, and it involves a lot of functional and cognitive control. So that's why this information is important because um, you might want to know if you're working with brains, you might want to know what are the parts of the brain. And the basal ganglia plays a very important role, as do all the other parts. All the other parts are important too. The thalamus. Not to be confused with the hypothalamus, but the thalamus is right here. It is above the hypothalamus, and it relays sensory information except smell. It does not relay smell for some odd reason. They made it extremely clear in the source down here that the thalamus does not have any role to play when it comes to smell. So if someone has, or take this information and someone does not have a sense of smell, it's either because their nose is blocked or because something else other than the thalamus is injured. But if they're complaining about smell, it's not the thalamus. But it does relay a lot of other sensory information. And think about what your other senses are: sight, touch, feel, hearing. So the thalamus does play a role in the other sensory informations. And it's also a relay for motor signals. So if you are sending information that is a motor signal, it's a relay for that. So this is in between point A and point B. It helps relay that information. It it does involve some consciousness and alertness. So um, obviously, I need to be conscious and alert to go grab my coffee cup, especially if it's got coffee in it or it needs coffee in it. So when we think about it that way, the thalamus is indeed very important. But there's still more to talk about when it comes to the limbic system. So let's get into it. The amygdala. The amygdala is down here. It is near the bottom part of the basal ganglia, and this is the amygdala. The amygdala is a small portion of the brain that is a processing center. So it takes a lot of this and sends it, stores it, retrieves it. It's a processing center. Think about it like the entrance. It processes stress, emotion, attention, behavior, and memory. So the amygdala is very important with memory because it is the processing center, another term for relay. Um, so if someone's memory is affected, one might be able to deduce that there might have been an injury to something leading to or from the amygdala or the amygdala itself. And so that's why the amygdala is important. It regulates a lot of the uh, ebb and flow of the hormones and the endorphins. So the the amygdala, vitally important, and you can kind of figure out that this deals a lot with the psychological, sociological, and the chemical responses within the body. But there's still more to cover, so let's get into it. The hippocampus. The hippocampus is over here. It is below the basal ganglia. It is near the amygdala. It serves as a memory function for registering, storing, and retrieving information. So um, when I go to make my morning coffee, I know how I like it. I registered that in my brain. I store that in my brain. And when it's time for me to make coffee, I retrieve that information from within my brain. There's a certain way I like it. So I have to retrieve that information. It is also big into learning. So if you can answer the question 2 + 2 = 4, you learn. So again, that is using your hippocampus, as well as regulating emotion and participating in decision making, which all of which is kind of important, and it kind of ties in together with social cues, with other social and psychological cues, as well as what's going on in the environment. So the hippocampus is indeed very important. But there's still more, so let's continue on. The cingulate gyrus, which is this organ that is right here. It is actually part of the limbic system, but it is also above the limbic system. It processes more of that emotion and behavior. Again, that seems to be a recurring theme with the limbic system is emotion and behavior. The reward system. So we're talking about those endorphins, those hormones, um, things that make you feel happy. It is involved with that as well. So I feel happy when I've accomplished something like making my morning coffee. So my cingulate gyrus must be working. Motivational processing. Again, that kind of ties in with that social, psychological aspect of the brain. And the cingulate gyrus already is important, but it also creates neurocircuits for the rest of the other structures, to include the rest of the limbic system and the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system. It also connects with cerebral structures. So there's a lot of information here. And again, this is just meant to be a brief overview of what all this does and what are the names, what is their basic functions, but we can see that the cingulate gyrus is in fact very important. So with that being said, what does this lead me as a brain injury case manager to conclude is that the limbic system, when someone says the limbic system, I have to think, well, there's more than one part. And so maybe if they were to specify it, that might lead to better information, better treatment, better outcomes. Um, each part is important to daily function, especially if you're like me and you need to reach over, make that cup of coffee. But this is sometimes voluntary or involuntary daily function, and especially the reward center in your brain. This is deep brain anatomy and can be overlooked at sometimes. Again, everyone who has seen the TV show with brains and anything involved, they usually see the cerebrum, but they're not really talking all that much about the cingulate gyrus, the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, hippocampus, or basal ganglia, which is all part of the limbic system. But an injury to any of these could have severe consequences, and that is why I emphasize the word prevention. So prevent the brain injury, prevent the injury to the limbic system, and you should be okay. Um, but with that being said, this kind of wraps up our the presentation today, anatomy part three, the limbic system, many parts, of course. We'd appreciate it if you leave us a comment, maybe subscribe, maybe give us a thumbs up because might sound more boring stuff, but to a brain nerd like myself, this is awesome. There are my references. They'll be in the description below. And I always welcome people to check out the references. We will gladly take topic suggestions in the comment section. So until then, I hope everyone has a great day. And don't forget, protect your brains out there.